if statement. Okay, now the if statement I was talking about. Now, if statement, you start with an equals to sign like that. Then you say if. So the first parameter in an if statement is a logical test. So logical test, that's now where we are checking whether that number in A2 is greater than, say, 50. So what we do, we say if. Now the logical test, as you can see, this is the first parameter, logical test. I said when you place a formula like that, you'll see all the arguments within. So you'll see logical test, you see value if true, you see value if false. So the logical test here will be checking whether A2 is greater than or equal to, remember that's the sign for greater than or equal to. So A2 is greater than or equal to 50. So that is our logical test. So the logical test will either return a true or a false. Remember our digital logics that we've just done. So it will be either a true or a false. Now, if it is a true, now we are done with the logical test. So when you're done with the logical test, you put a comma to separate the parameters. Okay. Now the next parameter is the value is true. Now, if that logical test proves to be true, what value do you want to put there? That's the next parameter. So in this case, maybe you want to say what? If A2 is greater than 50, you say what? Excellent. That's what we said you do, right? So because it's a string or it's text, you surround it with double quotation marks. Like that. So double quotation marks, then you put here, excellent. So you can see that's the value if true. So the value if true, you put excellent. Then you are done with value if true, then you put a comma. Then you go to the last parameter, which is value if false. So if that is not greater than 50, that means if it returns false, what do you write? Improve. Remember, that's what we say. You say improve. Again, because it's text or it's a string, you have to surround it in a double quotation mark. So we said when it's a string or it's text in a formula, you have to surround it in a double quotation mark. Okay? So you can see what we've done. So now we have the three parameters. We have the logical test, we have the value if true, then we have the value if false. And all of them are separated by commas. I hope you can see that, eh?
Yeah.
Now, if you close this one and just enter, you can see now under the comment we have 23 being improved. Now you can easily copy this formula. Now how do you copy it? Of course, you click on that, then you go to the bottom right and drag the formula down up to that point. And you can see now it has given exactly as we anticipated. Any mark that was above 50, it has given it as excellent. Any mark below 50 is improved. So if you had 1,000 records, you do the same thing. You just drag the formula down. You can actually do what we call nested if. Now, nested if is combining many if statements in one. So remember, for this one, we only had two conditions. It's either excellent or improved. Now, what if we had more notes to make? So say if one got between this and this, improved. If you got between this and this, fair. If you got between this and this, good, then excellent. Or you want to grade. Let's say it's a grading system, as a high school grading system, and you want to grade them. So your grading system here is, if someone got 80 plus, that person gets an A, right? If you get between or you get above 70, that is of course 70 to 80, you get a B. If you get 60, let me just write plus. If you get 60 plus, you get a C. If you get 50 plus, you get a D. If you do 40 plus, you get an E. Then anything below 39 and below, so 39 and minus, you get an F. So let's assume this is our grading system. So you want a comment here for what anybody got here. So let me add some few more marks here. 76, 68. Okay, so this is my grading system. So I want to put comments here. So whatever grade you got, it should automatically reflect on Excel right here. So the question is, how do I do it? Now, this is what I'm asking, that we introduce what we call a nested if statement. Okay, nested if statement. That means essentially what you're doing is you are putting an if inside an if, and this is how you do it. So of course, again, you just start with is equals to if. Now you go to the logical test. Now the logical test here, it's the first test, which is 80 and above. So again here, you are checking whether A2 is greater than or equal to 80. Okay, if A2 is greater than or equal to 80, that's the first one. So that is the logical test. So you put a comma to separate the parameters of the argument. Okay, then you go to value if true. So if the value is true, or if that logical test returns a true, you do what? You say now double quotation marks, text, but in this case it's an A. So you're putting a A right there. So that will only be true if that cell returns an A. So if not true, now if not true, instead of writing a B because it will not be a B, now you introduce another if statement in the place of false. So if you have checked whether A is greater than 80, if it is greater than 80, you get that A. If it is not greater than 80, you introduce what? You introduce another if statement. So if, like that. So the logical test again. So you've introduced another if statement, and now you're checking the another logical test. And in this case, you're checking whether this one is greater than or equal to 70. We have already finished 80. Now we are going to 70. Now, if this second if statement is true, of course you put a comma. If it is true, this now value becomes what? A B. So you're going to get a B there. What if it's not true? If still it's not true, you add another if statement. So another if, again to check the third one. So if again the same A2 is greater than or equal to In this case now 60. If it's greater than or equal to 60, you do what? A comma. In case it is double quotation marks, double quotation marks, then you say this is now C. If that again is not true, a comma, introduce another if statement to check the other one. So if, again, the logical test, you're now checking whether A2 is greater than or equal to, now we go to 50. If the value is true, again, double quotation marks, now this is going to be a D. Again, if that is not true, you introduce another if statement. So if, again, you check the logical test. So you're checking whether this one is greater than or equal to, now we are at 40. If that is true, comma, if the value is true, you say this is E. If that is not true, now we don't have another one, the next one is, the last one is F. So if all that is not true, then you say it's an F. So the last one here will be an F. I'm not introducing another if statement. So any other thing becomes an F. And that is a value false. Then I now close the first if statement, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one. There are 5 of them. So you have to put brackets for all of them. So now I can actually now just enter this one. So if I enter it there, F, and then I drag this down all the way to here. You can see I've gotten what I expected. A teacher by mistake decides to put 102 marks. Or someone decides to put negative 43. What should they get? You see, this one has gotten an A. Yet we know there is no marks like 102.
Yes.
Na hata hii hakuna marks kama F, kama negative 43. So we probably want to have, if anything is above this, maybe someone is supposed to get invalid mark and this one invalid mark. Sindio?
Yes.
So how would you do that now? Now that's a different ball game altogether, but it's still if statement, but now you're using AND as a formula. Remember when I was teaching you in digital logics, we just put AND here. But AND is also a formula. Okay?
Yes.
AND is a formula. So let me just, because we have, let me just do it here. Now the AND one is actually the best than what we have just done here, but we are still using the nested if. So AND, this is how AND works. If you say is equals to, and then you say AND. Now AND as a formula has many parameters. You can have as many as 10 or 20 parameters. Okay? Now we can check whether 23 is greater than, you know, for example, for this one, for the first one here, let me just explain here. This 80 plus, it means from 80 all the way to 100, right?
Yeah.
It's between 80 to 100. It's not any other figure above, below 80 or above 100. That means you have 2 limits there. You have limit 1 being lower limit 80, upper limit being 100. Now, how you'd set that limit using an AND, how would you do it? You do it like this. You say is equals to AND. So you take the first is a logical statement one. So you do A2 greater than or equal to 80. That is the first lower limit. And that is the first logical statement. Then you do a comma. Again, you say A2 less than or equal to 100. So can you see that? Now I have taken care of 2. I've said those marks, they have to be, A2 must be greater than 80, but also a comma, the same A2 must be less than 100. Now question, what do you expect the comment will be there if I'm using and? Remember we said and, all the statements must be true for it to be true.
False. Yeah.
Yeah, so you expect this to be a false. I hope you see that. Okay, so that's how you use and. We are checking 2 statements simultaneously. You're checking whether A2 must be greater than 80, A2 must be less than 100. The same way you can use, you can check or. It's the same kind of thing or kind of way that you can use to check check that or. Okay, now I can introduce an if statement. Remember we said an if statement uses actually three parameters. It uses 3 parameters. Okay, so you can introduce an if just before the and. An if. Remember the first one that we did, we used if. We used nested if, but we didn't have an and statement. Now what we have just done right now, we have just put an and. And we are now checking the 2 conditions. And the 2 conditions was A2 must be greater than or equal to 80. And the other one, A2 must be less than or equal to 100. And after we enter, we have gotten a false. Why? Because 23 has not met the 2 conditions. Now, if I introduce an if statement just before the and, just after equals to sign, I put an if statement there. And to complete it, I just press tab. Now, the logical test is going to be the whole of this one. The logical test of the if statement is going to be the whole of that and statement. Right? Kwani mmenyamaza? Do I repeat that again?
Yes.
So hadi kwa and mnaelewa? So hadi hapo mko sawa? Now, let me just actually first enter. What did we say an if statement has? If I say is equals to if, the first parameter of an if statement is a logical test. Sindio? And what did I say a logical test brings? It either brings true or false. Any logical test brings a true or a false test statement. So that if the value is true, you go to the second parameter. The value is false, you go to the third parameter, right? So now we are introducing an if just before the and for us to get this false as our logical test. Because now remember we are testing 2 conditions. We are testing whether our mark is between 80 and 100. So those are two conditions we are testing. Sindio? So if there are two conditions, then that's why we are using the help of AND, because AND can check more than two conditions. You can check 2, 3, 4, 5. Even if you had 5 conditions, it can check. So remember, in our original if, we were just checking whether this one is greater than 80, greater or equal to 80. We were just checking one condition. Sindio?
Yes.
Just that one. So if it is true, it returns value. If false, the other one. But now we are checking two conditions. We are not only checking greater than 80, but we are checking less than 100. The same A2, greater than 80 and less than 100. Now that's why now we are employing or using AND, because AND can check more than two conditions or two or more conditions. All right. So that's why instead of I'm coming here under the AND, now I'm introducing an if statement so that my AND becomes the logical test inside the if statement. So I'm going to have if here, if tab like that. Now when I do that, this whole AND becomes my logical test, which now will either return a true or a false. So how are we together? Betty,
Yes.
tuko pamoja? Clara,
Tunafuatana.
tunafuatana. Okay, so that becomes the logical test. Now after you're done with the logical test, the next one is true, is the value of true. So value of true remains a normal one. So we do a comma, move from logical test to value of true. So if that value is true, now that becomes an A. Remember we said an A, you have to surround it with double quotation marks since it's a text, it's text, data, or string. So A. If not true, or if the value is false, so comma, if the value is false, now this is again we introduce another if. Remember what we did in the other one? If the value is true, it's A. If not true, we introduce if there, like that. So now after introducing if, remember in this second if we have to check now two conditions again. We are checking now for you to get a B, it has to be between 70 and 79. So because there are two conditions, again we have to introduce an AND right there. So now we'll put another AND there. Now this AND is coming to help us check the upper limit and the lower limit. So again, we are going to say that A2 must be greater than or equal to 70. And the other limit is, so you do a comma, separate the next logical two of AND statement, then still A2 must be less than, or you can say less than 80 or less than or equal to 79. It's the same. Less than or equal to 79. So again, you have checked two conditions there. And you close your AND statement. Now that AND statement becomes the logical test for the second if. So if those two conditions are met, comma, the value is true. So if true, this will now be a B. Again, don't forget the double quotations there. So now this becomes a B. Okay? Again, if those two conditions are not met, so the value falls, so it falls again a comma, then you again add another if. Again, within inside if, you need to test two conditions. So again, you use another AND. So now this AND is checking between 60 and 69. right? So again, we are checking whether this one is greater than or equal to 60. The first test. The second one is still A2 is less than or equal to 69. So you close that AND. So if that now logical test is true, this person must have gotten a what? A C. So you come here and do C. All right. Now, if still it's not C, again you introduce another if statement. So again, if, and inside if, again now you're checking two conditions. So again, an AND. So inside this AND, now you're checking between 50 and 59. So now you're still checking whether this one is greater than or equal to 50. Or still this one must be less than or equal to 59. So you close your AND statement there. So if that condition proves to be true, then comma. So the value if true, now at 50 we are at D. So again, double quotations, you put your D there. Now, if still that is not true, again introduce another if statement. Again, the logical test use an AND. So the AND here, you're still checking whether this one is greater than or equal to 40. The first one. The second one, still this one must be less than or equal to 49. You close your AND. If that is true, this becomes a what? An E. Sindio? This becomes an E. If not true, now you can say what? An F. If any other thing is not within that purview, then it becomes an F. But instead of doing an F, because remember there is invalid mark. Remember, kuna invalid mark. Sindio? So I don't want to just put an F. So I'll go to the next one and still say if. So again, if the logical test, I'm checking whether this one is greater than, now in this case I'm going out to put greater than or equal to 0. So between 0, that is 0. Now the next one is still this one less than 39, less than or equal to 39, right? No, so we should have introduced an AND here. Close there. So if this is true, we say this is a what? An F. Sindio? So if this is not true, now we write here what? Invalid mark. Any other thing that we have not covered now should be an invalid mark. Now I can close now the first if, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. There are 6 of them. I'm sure now it looks intimidating, Ama.
Very.
Lakini the logic of it is not hard, sindio?
Dealing with 2 ifs or 1 if, it's easy.
Huh?
Anyway, tuendelee tu.
Ati? So you just need to enter this. And you can see that one is F. Now if I drag this down, You can see we have two invalid marks,
Mhm.
and all the others are correctly graded.